Matt is coming up to talk to us a bit later, starting a sermon series on Proverbs that will be running through the rest of the year. And he's asked for 3 readings this morning, which should be coming up on the screen. So our readings are from 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 7 to 12, chapter 4, verse 29, and from Proverbs 1, verses 1 to 7. And now, O my Lord God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked for this, and God said to him, because you have asked for this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. Behold, I do now according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has seen before you, and none like you shall arise after you. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. There's a lot in Proverbs, so I'm very interested to hear what Matt's got to say to us.
So this morning, I'll be kicking off a sermon series on the Book of Proverbs, like we've already talked about. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but the world seems to be becoming more confusing, or at least more complex, I think, at a faster rate. I've been in a couple of social gatherings over the last couple of weeks, and I've heard a bunch of non-church people talk about the complexities of Israel and Palestine. And they're feeling, this particular person, this friend was feeling pressured to kind of have to pick a side. They felt that their respective friendship groups were kind of falling into sides, and they were feeling the pressure and the compulsion to have to pick a side. I was at another social gathering, and again, this was like a regular party. This isn't like Bible study night. This is a regular party where parents were discussing the intricacies of gender identity and schools, and how and what, if anything, to say to their kids. So again, that was kind of confronting them with a relatively recent complexity of modern life. I was reading a GQ article online the other day entitled, literally, "Why is everyone on steroids now?" which argued that biohacking, so again, humans really drastically changing or altering their physiology, biohacking via things like testosterone supplements and human growth hormone is now super common. It's almost like mainstream. It's no longer something that's kind of done behind closed doors amongst competitive bodybuilders, but it's mainstream among both young and middle-aged men. And to a certain degree, women as well. So now literally, and maybe not so much here, but definitely on the mainland, if not here, and definitely in the States, in America, that kind of professional-looking, jacked, suburban dad on the machine next to you at the gym could be regularly injecting himself at home in a desperate attempt to keep aging and the physical decrepitude that comes with aging at bay. So it sounds crazy, but it may be now a real risk for me. It may be a reality that I'll be having conversations with my 2 sons sometime soon about the risks of steroid use. You'll know when I start using them because one of the side effects is hair loss. I'm looking around. Okay, so I'd argue that none of these things are simple issues. They're again, none of them are simple. None of them are simple. Despite many people on virtually every single side of each of those debates wanting them to be. None of them are that simple. Now, coupled with that, the places the people used to go to for guidance in the midst of really complex change are declining in importance and influence. Now, please hear me, the distinction that I want to draw is that between information and wisdom. So I'm drowning, probably like you, in information. If I wanted to find out like the best way, for example, to prepare for running the Pointed Pinnacle this year, I could easily jump online and I could find that information readily. If I could like look around for some slow cooker recipes on how to do a great minestrone, again, I could jump online, I could consult plenty of books and I'd find that information so quickly. There's plenty of ready information. But if I want to work out how to balance my family time with my career ambitions, if I want to work out what it means to be a good man in today's world, if I want guidance on how to manage money and wealth over the long term, if I want to know how to grow old gracefully, all these big life questions, I need more than information, I need wisdom. Now, in years gone by, when people wanted wisdom, they could soon turn to their family elders. They could consult the tradition of their faith or their spirituality that they're likely inherited, for example. Or they could like fall back on the largely consensus-based, agreed upon vanilla worldview that everyone in their particular context held, which would have had some common vision of right and wrong and what constitutes a good life. There would be at least a rough path and someone in your life who could point out that path to you. Now, I know this is like a big generalization. There are plenty of exceptions, and I don't want to make out that the past was all beer, skittles, rosy ideals and great for everyone. It wasn't. But nevertheless, it's different than now. The landscape has drastically changed, but there's still this need for wisdom. Maybe now more than ever, maybe not, but it's definitely needed. And I'd argue it's harder to find. So enter the Book of Proverbs, a book, in my humble opinion, that has the unfortunate title in English because it highlights the means and not the end, not the goal. Proverbs is all about acquiring wisdom. It's all about acquiring wisdom. It's about how to live well, if you like. If you want more than mere information, as useful as it is to know all those cool slow cooker recipes, if you're interested in living the best life that you can and dealing with very real realities like suffering, for example, regardless of your age or your stage, Proverbs is for you. So let me start off with some background on the book this morning. The intro, as we heard, read the first 7 verses, references Solomon. Solomon was the embodiment of wisdom. The story that we heard from 1 Kings, it involves God asking Solomon, effectively on the eve of his becoming king of Israel, what he would like from God. So God comes to Solomon and says, what can I give you? What would you like? And again, the options, like we heard, are endless. Could be long life, could be riches, could be peace in the kingdom, could be the death, presumably slow and painful, of all his enemies. Solomon could have requested anything of this nature. But instead, he requests understanding and discernment for governing his people, the nation. And God grants him this. And Solomon, before his story goes bad, and it does go pretty bad, becomes internationally renowned for his wisdom. And Solomon just doesn't embody wisdom, he teaches it. Some commentators speculate that it's at this time in the nation of Israel's history, this high point of peace and prosperity, that a wisdom culture flourished. So you had like official sages, you had court advisors, you had wise men, and maybe even schools were established at this time to propagate and collect wisdom. So in Proverbs chapter 25, verse 1, we read that the compilation of Solomon's Proverbs took place in King Hezekiah's reign. So one of Solomon's successors, which was around, we think his reign was between 729 and 686 BC. And I'm only pointing this out to, I suppose, help me realise that the book that we're looking at, the Proverbs that are contained, are likely at least 2,500 years old. They've been around for a while. And if they've been around for a while and survived that long, it says something about their integrity and usefulness and their truth, I'd argue, for anything to survive that long. So hopefully this background is interesting and useful. The nation of Israel, it's been shown God's will for them in the past, his intent for them both as individuals, how they should live individually, but also as a community, as a nation. It had been shown these things through the law. For example, the Ten Commandments. God reveals his directives to the nation of Israel via the Ten Commandments. God also has revealed, again, his ways, his intent for people and the nation via prophets. So God's spokespeople who pointed the nation back to Israel when they start to drift and turn their back on him. But the wisdom contained in the Book of Proverbs is different from either of these two ways of God communicating his truth to people. It's another way of God speaking and revealing himself to people. It's based on God giving people, his creatures, the ability to reflect and observe his created order. So we, as people, we see patterns in creation, don't we? We create categories based on similarities and differences. We discern patterns and consequences. We link cause and effect. We start to put together how God's world usually works. And as a result, we start to discern and navigate how we can best flourish in it. So that makes the book immensely practical and relevant. But a risk with it is that we don't give it enough credit for being spiritual. You can wonder, if you like, where God is in the midst of this book. It's got about 900 proverbs and only about 100 explicit references to God. But it tells us a lot about God. It tells us what God cares for, what he promotes and commends, again, both as individuals and as a community. So, for example, chapter 6, verses 6 to 19 makes it clear that God puts a premium on humility and truth-telling, and that he hates it when people sow discord within a community and shed innocent blood. We can learn more about God through the Book of Proverbs. And lastly, by way of background, this is a really hopeful, optimistic book. Now, we know that life is messy. We know that life has been marred by sin, our selfishness, if you like. But Proverbs is based on the fact that despite these very real things, there's enough goodness, there's enough order still present in creation, coupled with God's involvement and sustaining of it. So there's enough of those things, the goodness, the order, the God sustaining it, that life can be negotiated, if you like. It's not just chaos or blind chance. A good, flourishing life is still largely within the grasp of people. But here's the kicker, and it's a really important one. The path to that good, flourishing life is not through information alone. It doesn't come with just knowing more stuff, even the right stuff. It doesn't come with being cognitively aware of more truth, even. The good life is a case of not so much just being informed as being shaped. And that's what Proverbs wants to do, shape us. And that shaping needs to involve the human heart. Again, not in the way that we moderns think about the heart being just like our emotional centre, but how the Israelites considered the heart, the command centre, if you like, of the entire person. So Proverbs wants to shape our heart, as well as our character and our actions. Wisdom, in the Proverbs sense, is becoming a particular kind of person. Becoming a particular kind of person. Not just doing smart things or making the big, clever moves in life. It's about becoming a particular kind of person. Now for the structure of the book. We'll be diving into this more over the course of the series, but you can break the entire 31-chapter book into two basic parts. You've got chapters 1 to 9, which Alistair is going to be looking at in a fortnight's time, and the remainder, chapters 10 to 31. And the two are quite different. Chapters 1 to 9, so that first section, has been described as a prologue, almost. It's also been seen as a series of lectures that make the same point. And that point is helping the reader, us, understand, and apply everything that follows in chapters 10 to 31. So chapters 1 to 9 really set the scene for the entire book. Chapters 10 to 31, on the other hand, are collections and examples of Proverbs. And these Proverbs cover all the important parts of life: relationships, character, money, aging, parenting, etc. They're attributed to mostly Solomon, who we've already spoken about, but also other ancient Israelite sages. And even, at the end, what looks like a non-Israelite author, King Lemuel. Now, the really challenging thing about this collection from chapters 10 to 31 is that, to our modern eyes at least, they don't look very well organised. They aren't nicely collated under subject headings. The reader, instead, needs to spend time becoming super familiar with them, because they're not meant to be cherry-picked and read in isolation. Proverbs on the same theme inform each other. So the reader's wisdom drastically expands if you can take all the Proverbs about a particular theme or subject into account. So there's a really good example of this if you want to look it up in chapter 29:19 and 17:2. These two separate Proverbs that both talk about servants. And one proverb says pretty much there's a high risk that you've got to watch servants all the time, because you know what happens if you don't keep an eye on them. And the other one kind of specifies that you have to be wary of the occasional lazy servant. So your understanding of servants, if you like, back in the day, is expanded when you hold both those in tension together. Now, whilst penned for instruction, they can also be classed as poetry. And this is interesting, because given that it's poetry, and given that individual proverbs contrast, and in some famous cases even contradict each other, and given that they were meant to be studied and meditated and reflected upon and learnt in a group, so literally a school or a court or a family setting, and given that they're meant to instill wisdom for dealing with everyday life, all of this suggests that Proverbs is a book that we're meant to wrestle with. Tim and Kathy Keller wrote this excellent devotion on the Book of Proverbs, and they said that one of the book's main messages is, you, the reader, you've never really thought enough about anything. You've never really thought enough about anything. So this is not a self-help book. This is not some kind of simplistic instruction manual, just do X, Y, and Z in life and you'll be fine. This is also not just a compilation of common sense or 900 rules for life. And this is why chapters 1 to 9 are so important, because they provide a really basic and fundamental recipe, if you like, for how to understand all the Proverbs that follow. And this recipe, again, that Alistair will go into more detail with, the highlights, if you like the big points of the recipe, come up in verses 1 to 7 of chapter 1, particularly verse 7, which we heard read out before. This is a high point and theme that re-emerges at the end of chapter 9 and right at the end of the collection in chapter 31. So the authors, the people who've compiled this, they want the readers to notice this because it comes up at least 3 times in the book. And that is this theme: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord is the beginning. Now, it's really important to note that this phrase, the fear of the Lord, pops up earlier through the Old Testament in Scripture. We'll look at it in more detail next week, but it can be summarised, if you like, as this. So it's not living in abject terror. It's not that kind of fear of God. It's more respecting God, treating him as he deserves. And that's from Lindsay Wilson, author and commentator on Proverbs. Now, again, it's so easy, particularly if you've been part of a church for a while, just to roll this phrase off the tongue. But there's so much behind that, underneath it. It's getting at a fundamental heart posture. Who's going to be the ultimate authority in my life? Who will have the final say in my life as to what is right and wrong? Who will take all my many desires and aspirations, particularly the good ones, the noble ones, and arrange them in the proper order of value? Will it be God, or will it be some other lesser being? It has to be someone, Someone has to give me direction and provide ultimate authority for making all those difficult big life decisions. If I fear God, then I'll have this attitude of a humble learner. I won't have to understand everything God asks of me before doing it. On the other hand, if I don't fear God, I'll be at risk of continually demanding that I completely understand and agree with everything he asks of me before I live it out. So fear of God, this crucially makes the attaining of wisdom more than just learning common sense. It involves, again, a heart posture based on trust. That's the first big ingredient. The second ingredient that we pick up in these first couple of verses and the chapters 1 to 9 is that the wisdom seeker must continually choose the way of wisdom over the path of folly. Throughout these 9 chapters, we'll soon see that when it all boils down in life, there really are only 2 ways to live. There's, on the one hand, following the character that we'll soon get to know as Lady Wisdom. So there's Lady Wisdom, and she presents one way to live. But she has this rival, who's often referred to as Dame Folly over here. Now, the former, Lady Wisdom, personifies God's wisdom and ways. Dame Folly over here stands for anything and everything else. And a couple of quick things on here. It's a continual choice that we're called to make daily. It's not a once and done, but the rest of our lives. And it's often a hard choice as well. As we'll see, Dame Folly has her charms at first glance. She's got stuff on offer. And lastly, her path, her way of life, it's pretty easy to take. I think it's comparable to not exercising, eating poorly, and neglecting to call your mum. It doesn't take much effort to do any of those things, right? It doesn't take much effort at all. That's what she's offering. Lady Wisdom, on the other hand, she also has her much superior and long-lasting charms. But her way involves discipline, effort, humility. But again, it's the only path to the good life. And the third element, the third part of the recipe, the wisdom seeker needs to have their character shaped by God. And this is obviously linked to the first 2. It's really a reminder that when it comes again to the trenches of everyday life, we don't have a detailed instruction book with black and white, easy to access answers to the many and varied challenges we face. Life is just too complex for that. The right information alone won't be enough to be wise. The right information alone won't be enough to be wise. Instead, character, doing the right thing for the right reasons, is necessary. Daily ethical decision-making requires a good character, not just smarts. You'll find plenty of smart people, if you haven't done already, who act in incredibly immoral ways. It's more than just street smarts, it's more than just intelligence. Character counts. Does that make sense? So they're the 3 elements that go into understanding and acquiring wisdom, particularly the wisdom from chapters 10 to 31. Now, this leads to the actual Proverbs themselves. And it's hard to find modern day equivalents of the individual Proverbs. As mentioned above, they're a kind of ancient poetry. So without getting too nerdy, a common feature of Hebrew poetry is parallelism. So where you get back-to-back, usually 2-part observations, which read together in parallel give you a richer understanding of each of those 2. So some examples. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. So you read those 2 in parallel. You've got the 2 parts, and you read them together. And so you learn that whatever pride is, it also involves a haughty spirit. So reading those 2 give you a broader understanding than just taking one or the other in isolation. So that's one example of parallelism. Or you've got back-to-back Proverbs in contrast, which highlight the differences between them. So, for example, a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So you've got the big contrast between the 2, which gives you a more thorough understanding of each of them. Proverbs often employ really vivid images, like clouds and wind without rain is one who boasts of a gift never given. Like clouds and wind without rain is the one who boasts of a gift never given. And you think immediately, you've got at least one of those people in your life who promised you something and never delivered, and you still remember them. And you think, yeah, that's right. They were a bit like clouds and wind without rain. They were that kind of underwhelming and disappointing. I remember that. It's a really vivid, memorable image. Famously, some proverbs seem to contradict each other. But again, this is a good thing. It shows that it's not a simple rules for life for dummies book. Instead, wisdom, lived out day to day, is context specific. Sometimes Proverb A should be deployed, sometimes it'll be Proverb B. Also, some Proverbs realise that realistically in life, you can't have it all. So you have to choose between options, and some options are better than others. So, for example, better is a little wisdom with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. If you've got the choice in front of you for a get-rich-quick scheme that you know is going to be dubious and probably hurt some people, you're better off with a little, not so much money and material wealth, but righteousness. It's better than. In other words, you can't always have it all. And some proverbs are shocking. They remind us that life doesn't always seem fair or predictable. A gracious woman gets honour. That's good. That seems right. And violent men get riches. Maybe all those gangster movies were right. The fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice. The poor deserve better, but they get done over through injustice. And that's the way that life sometimes is, and it's hard. And some proverbs just remind us of our place and subsequent dependence upon God. And again, this is that fear of the Lord theme. I'm a creature, God is the creator. So many of the plans in the mind of a man, Matthew, or gift of God, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. No wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. And I think these type of proverbs particularly sum up the overall tension we've talked about of Proverbs and wisdom as a whole. God has graciously revealed so much of how his good and ordered universe works. He gives us, his people, the capacities to study, observe, and reflect on how to best navigate that. He wants us to be people who are shaped by that wisdom to best resemble him. God is righteous and loving. Proverbs is all about instruction and encouragement for his people to also be righteous and loving. But, God is still God. We're still creatures, and the world that we find ourselves in, whilst good, is also broken and compromised by sin. That means Proverbs are rules of thumb, not so much rules for life. They're God-given, to use a $20 word, heuristics. They help us attain wisdom and lead a good life, but they are not ironclad rules. If you do X, Y will always, always, always follow. Life is too messy, and it involves too many relationships and way too much free will. All that stuff cannot be reduced to rules. So to conclude, we'll be spending, as I said, 5 to 6 sermons going through this ancient collection of wisdom sayings. We want to help equip people, again, of all ages and stages, to live a wise life in their particular and unique context. But again, this isn't life hacks or a simple instruction manual. This is about God shaping people from the inside out. The fear of the Lord is the bedrock and prerequisite of wisdom. Wisdom, if you like, is relational. And this relationship is achieved through and with Jesus. Jesus enables us to fear God, again, to respect, to revere, and to love him. And Jesus is described by Paul as no less in the letter to the church at Colossae as the one in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. All the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So let's get this right from the start. If you truly want to be wise, if you want to learn to navigate life well, if you want to bolster the chances of you, your family, and your community flourishing, doing okay in life, as well as actually actively safeguarding yourselves against the inevitable suffering, then love and follow Jesus. If you want to recognise and stay on the path of wisdom and be able to distinguish it from the alluring, oh so easy, super enticing and confusing way of folly, then love and follow Jesus. There are so many competing voices out there. And I know it is a mutually exclusive call that I'm putting out. There's two paths when it all boils down to it. There are two paths, and there's really no room for straddling a fence between the two. Now, look, that's not to say that there aren't elements of truth outside Christian wisdom and faith, because we believe that all truth that has been revealed, all true truth, is God's truth. But I'm talking about overall paths and ways of life. Again, wisdom and folly. There are only two. If you think you found a better way than Jesus and his wisdom, please see me afterwards. This book, which in its way points to him, is going to deal again with money, sex, power, violence, friendship, work, aging, and death. It does so with depth, with nuance, and with really rigorous honesty. There are no quick fixes or pyramid schemes contained in the Book of Proverbs. And further, it's been put together intentionally to be studied and meditated upon in community, which at least helps save me from my arrogance, blind spots, and biases. So if it's not this, then what? What do you turn to help guide you towards living a good life? If you'd like to try one thing this week, again, I'll be looking at the first 7 verses of chapter 1, the absolute prologue next week, and then after that, Alistair will be looking at the first 9 chapters. If you'd like to do just one thing to prepare, I'd encourage you, go over chapters 1 to 9. Doesn't take very long. There's not really that much to read. And again, it's a pretty interesting and gripping read. And offer a simple prayer to God that he'll give you and us, your community, more wisdom. That'd be great. Okay, let me pray. Father, we thank you for being the kind of God that just has generously and graciously disclosed and revealed so much of both yourself and your character, and also how your world, still good, still intact, works. And I pray that we will do what we can, both by your grace and also just through any effort we can make to be more disciplined and intentional in paying attention to that, Father. Help us respond to you, again, with your assistance in that way. And also help us hold in tension the fact that you are still God, you are other, and we are creatures. And everything here is definitely not perfect and ideal. I once again pray, Father, that you'll help us endeavour to do this not just in isolation, but help us both rely on and support each other here, shoulder to shoulder, I pray. Amen.